Readsy's ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to help you write, edit, publish, market better books. Yeah, thank you for joining us this Wednesday. Regular viewers may notice that I'm in a slightly different location. I've decided to move this upstairs from the usual home office, but hopefully it all will be fine. In just a couple of minutes, we'll be joined by two Readsy editors, Tracy Gold and Julie Artz. Both of them are, among other things, copy editors. I believe they both developmental work today, focusing on the copy edit. Early this week, late last week, we asked you to send in little excerpts of your work, little passages, problem passages, with the idea that Tracy and Julie are going to copy edit them live right in front of you. And from that, you'll be able to see the sort of processes that editors go through when they're retooling, reworking, and perfecting sentences and paragraphs. This will help you edit your own work and in turn also understand what an editor does, which is always a big question we get here at Readsy. Thank you for all tuning in. I can see we've got loads of folks from everywhere, Switzerland, Ohio, Alberta, Canada. The Canadians always represent themselves very well here. Glad to see you here again. Anna, who's in her barn, Unicorn Hollow in Virginia. That sounds nice. Someone from Cornwall, from Palo Alto. But yeah, it's looking good. It's just going to be a minute or so, and then I'll bring Tracy and Julie in. They're going to give you a bit of an intro and go straight into it. As I mentioned, we asked you to submit a paragraph or so of your own work for them to edit. As usual, it was popular. We had just about 300 submissions. If we could make this last all night long, we probably still wouldn't get through more than a quarter of them. So we've had to be a little bit selective. We cut them off a few hours ago, and I picked some ones that sort of run the range of different issues they might have on a copy side, and then a few different genres as well, just so you can see, get a bit of variety. So I'm sorry if yours doesn't get covered tonight, but you're in the majority, should I say. But hopefully you'll still be able to learn quite a lot from Tracy and Julie that you can apply to your own work. This is now just 1 minute past 8 o'clock, 3 p.m. on the East Coast, midday on the West Coast. Time to bring on Tracy and Julie. Just give me a second. Let me bring them on. Hello, Tracy. On the left-hand side bottom, Julie on the right-hand side bottom. How are both of you? Julie, where are you today?
I'm just outside of Seattle, Washington.
Oh, lovely. And Tracy?
And I'm in Baltimore. And now that we've switched, our office doors don't line up like they were before.
Darn it.
I know. We were commenting before. I couldn't make this work. Let me see if I should juggle these around here. Nope, not quite. Oh, well. Anyway, it's people are still sort of pouring in. We've got 400 people tuned in right now. If we could all give us a like, that'd be amazing. It would just help this be seen by more people, and I certainly would appreciate it. I'll pop off now. People will be rolling in, but as we say, we'll be doing a handful of these. If you're ready, let me know, and I'll start sharing the screen. Otherwise, have fun.
Great. Yeah, so I'm Tracy. I edit YA, adult, and picture books across a variety of genres, including fiction and nonfiction. Julie?
And I'm Julie. I edit middle grade in YA with a particular sweet spot for fantasy, although I do other genres as well. And I also edit narrative nonfiction and memoir. So a few quick words before we dive in. We are going to be copy editing using Chicago Manual of Style. That is the standard in the publishing industry. But there are other style guides out there that are slightly different. So it's important to pick a style and be consistent no matter which style guide you're using.
We also wanted to quickly talk about what a copy edit means. It means reading a text very carefully to pick up all errors and to make sure the style is consistent and clean. It doesn't normally include comments on big picture elements like character or plot, though I will sometimes lightly comment on those issues if I notice them.
Yeah, I normally recommend doing a copy edit after the author feels like they've done everything they can to make the book as the best that it can be. That means getting feedback from beta readers and doing your own revision. What you don't want to do is do a copy edit when you still have big picture changes that need to be made, because then you just have to go and copy edit it again. So, and traditional publishers provide copy edits for their authors. So for the majority of cases, if you're looking for a copy edit, it's probably because you're self-publishing.
Okay, so Martin, we can bring up the document. What we're gonna do is read aloud each entry as it is, and then go into the copy edits. So this is You Can Call Me 20 by Catherine McKean. And it's the start of the introduction of a detective who's interviewing a character named 20. Ed was approaching retirement and he had aged badly. The pouches sagging below his eyes, large and baggy enough to serve as pockets if he needed to, showed that. They were dark and uncomfortable looking, somehow matching the vertical line sharply etched on either side of his mouth. He was poorly turned out. His crumpled, ill-fitting suit was spotted with long-standing grease marks and crumbs from a sandwich bolted down between two interviews. Okay, so I'm just going to go through line by line and tell you what I notice. First thing is capitalization of the title. In Chicago, they've got a whole page on what to capitalize in a title, but basically you capitalize all of the major words. So I'm just gonna, I'm still in editing. I'm gonna go in suggesting. Just gonna put that in Chicago title case. And then for Chicago style, an ellipses is a space, a period, a space, period, a space, period, another space. Sure, I don't have an extra space. Okay, so Ed was approaching retirement and he had aged badly. The pouches sagging below his eyes, large and baggy enough to serve as pockets if he needed to, showed that. So that trips me up a little bit. I absolutely love this metaphor though. I can really see it, but I want to tighten it up. I think this is going to solve the problem. The pouches sagging below his eyes were large and baggy enough to serve as pockets. And then I don't think you need the whole rest of that sentence because we get it from what we've already seen. They were dark and uncomfortable looking, somehow matching the vertical lines sharply etched on either side of his mouth. I don't really think that we need this. First of all, I'm not really sure what the author means by somehow matching the lines. Maybe just that it's showing a face that's tired in general, but I think this is going to be stronger if we just let that metaphor of the bags looking like pockets do most of the talking. So I would actually just cut, I think all of that. Make sure I don't cut the period in the space. Maybe just do vertical lines sharply etched. And I would do the sides of his mouth. Vertical line sharply etched the sides of his mouth. He was poorly turned out. So that's really interesting because it seems like it's just telling the readers. It seems like this author is just telling the readers what the character looks like when they've really gone into that. But personally, when I think of somebody being turned out, I horseback ride and we talk about horses turn out and the riders turn out all the time. So it makes me get this sense that maybe this is some kind of small town, or just it adds to the voice for me. So I would leave it. Let's see. His crumpled, ill-fitting suit was spotted with grease marks, with long-standing grease marks. I think I'm gonna cut it's long-standing. I would probably cut either ill-fitting or long-standing just because that's a lot of hyphenated phrases for one sentence. The most common rule for what should be hyphenated now is that there's two, if you're combining two words in front of a noun, but really just recently the rules changed where you only have to hyphenate if it's needed to make the meaning clear. But in this case, I think we're getting a little bit of adjective overload. So I would probably lean towards taking out long-standing grease marks because grease marks to me implies that they're long-standing. And crumbs from a sandwich bolted down between two interviews. This kind of, the first time I read it, this kind of made me stop a little bit because I was reading bolted as a verb of sort, thinking that the crumbs were doing the bolting and not the character. So I would just add crumbs from the sandwich he bolted down between two interviews. So I think I will. We were going back and forth on whether we should read them aloud afterwards, but I think I will. Ed was approaching retirement and he had aged badly. The pouches sagging below his eyes were large and baggy enough to serve as pockets. Vertical lines sharply etched the sides of his mouth. He was poorly turned out. His crumpled, ill-fitting suit was spotted with grease marks and crumbs from the sandwich he bolted down between two interviews. Julie, do you have anything to add or comment on there?
No, I think it looks great.
All right, let's do Julie.
Okay, so I've got Victoria Black by Wendy Wee. His face screws when he sees my eyes, like they're the most unnatural, disgusting thing. I hated them when I was younger. People called me a freak for having one dark brown eye and one light blue eye, but now I love them. They're my weapon. Gives me that evil, crazed look. I pull up his shirt just enough to expose the skin of his belly. I drag my knife around it in circles. His belly trembles. It makes me smile. Okay, so we've got an interesting opening scene here where she's maybe got a hostage. She's dragging a knife around in circles on his belly. He's disgusted with her and she's feeling powerful. She's got a weapon in her hand and also her eyes as a weapon. Sounds like the beginning maybe of a thriller. So I would just add his face screws up. I think is the idiom that you're going for there. When he sees my eyes. Now I would go ahead and move the what is special about her eyes up right here to the front so that we know it sort of sets the atmosphere, I think, for the rest of this paragraph. So I would say his face screws up when he sees my eyes. Oops. One dark brown and one light blue. Like they're the most unnatural, disgusting thing. So this is technically a fragment, but I think it really works with the voice here. So I think this is a great example to use because fragments, when used intentionally, can be really powerful. So I hated them when I was younger. People called me a freak. So we've already talked about this, so we can cut that. But now I love them. They're my weapon. Give me that evil, crazed look, because it's eyes plural. So they give me that evil, crazed look. I pull up his shirt just enough to expose the skin of his belly, which is a great image there. I drag my knife around it in circles. His belly trembles. So I I went back and forth on this, but I would probably, to avoid repeating Belly, just say he trembles. And I wondered too about I smile. It's not that it makes me smile is incorrect, but I like the rhythm of he trembles, I smile. I think it's a strong ending for this mini scene. So, Tracy, do you have anything that you want to add?
I just want to know what happens next for this one. I mean, I don't even, like, this character sounds awesome. The one who's standing up for herself, I guess, or maybe she's evil. I don't know, but I want to know.
Yeah, it definitely made me want to read more. So
yeah,
so nice work.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep up with the comments. So Martin, I'm actually gonna go up to you can call me 20. A few people pointed out that you should take the comma out after grease marks. Yes, definitely in the last sentence. So yeah, that comma can go. His crumpled, ill-fitting suit was spotted with grease marks and crumbs from the sandwich he bolted down between two interviews. Yep, you don't need that comma. Okay, that's it. You would need the comma if you had two items. Well, the Oxford comma is a whole. I don't think that we're going to get into that today because that could be a whole hour. All right, so going down to Stake Through the Heart by Laksha. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Leo. This is a crime thriller novel, and it's the opening. And I will read it as is. The eerie calmness of the midnight silence was sliced through by a shrill scream. It was highly unlike to be that of a boy, but it was. A tall, dark figure was chasing the boy into a dungeon-like, smelly dead end of a street. The boy ran like he could never run again in his life, with no soul to help. The figure, however, chased the boy with equal force as the 15-year-old boy. So for this one, I definitely want to talk about commas. But as I was reading it aloud, one of my tricks for commas outside of rules is when you read your work aloud, if you have a slight pause, you should probably have a comma. If you have take a full breath, you should probably have a period or maybe a semicolon. And if you don't pause, then that comma doesn't belong there. But to go back to the beginning of this one, Stake Through the Heart, here we are with Chicago style. So through is a preposition here, and the is an article, and in Chicago style, you do not capitalize those, but heart would be capitalized. The eerie calmness of the midnight silence was sliced through by a shrill scream. It was highly unlike to be that of a boy, but it was. So I'm not quite sure what this means. Is this highly unlikely to be that of a boy? So my question here is, who is the narrator? Who is saying that it's unlikely to be that of a boy? Does it not sound like a boy? Is it just unusual for a boy to be out at midnight? So I think, I'm going to proceed ahead knowing that I have those questions and just trying to help this without really knowing the answers. The eerie calmness of the midnight silence. So my other question is, why is midnight possessive? I think you could just cut that. This first sentence is also, this comma here is what's called a comma splice. It's a little hard to say because the second half of the sentence, so the second half of the sentence can stand alone, and so can the first half. You should have a semicolon or a period or a conjunction like and not just a comma. This sentence is a little long and confusing, so I'm just going to do a period. The eerie calmness of the midnight silence was sliced through by a shrill scream. I can't pronounce shrill today, I guess. I think that's a great first sentence. That really catches me. So just to keep the meaning here in the absence of really knowing exactly what the author is trying to say, It was highly unlike. This should be unlikely to be that of a boy, but it was. So that's said with a note that that of a boy is a little awkward. So if I were the author, if I were editing this, I would ask the author, what are you trying to say here? And probably rewrite that sentence a little bit more. Let's see. A tall, dark figure was chasing the boy into the dungeon. Okay, so here you don't need a comma because this is not an introductory phrase. The guide for whether you need a comma or not is if the sentence doesn't make sense without it, you should not use a comma. So this sentence wouldn't really make sense without a tall, dark figure. So no comma. And here's an example where you do need a hyphen in order for things to make sense. So this is my autocorrect says, dungeon like a smelly dead end of a street. Well, I don't think that is what this author means. So it should be, was chasing the boy into a dungeon hyphen like smelly dead end of a street. And here I would put commas. If you've got two or more adjectives before a noun, you should use commas. So tall dark figure was chasing the boy into a dungeon-like smelly dead end of a street. The boy ran like he could never run again in his life with no soul to help. So I think what the author is trying to say here, and this is the thing about copy editing, is sometimes I'll suggest something, say this doesn't work for me, this is what I suggest, but the author could say, oh, actually I meant this, and come up with something totally better. So with that caveat, the boy ran like his life depended on it, with no soul to help, is what I would do there. So the figure, however, and now since however is not necessary for the meaning of the sentence, it can be set off with two commas. So if it were just at the beginning, however, you would just put one comma, but since it's in the middle, you need two commas to set it off. The figure, however, chased the boy with equal force as the 15-year-old boy. So here we've got 15-year-old boy repeated. I think we could just tighten this all up with something like ran with equal speed. And that, I think, is all I have. Julie, any thoughts on this one?
Well, one thing I did notice about this one is that it does have a lot of sort of passive voice. There's a couple instances even in the short space of to be verbs. So I agree. I like that that it starts with the eerie calmness of the midnight silence, and then it's sliced through by a shrill scream. So you could rewrite that to be more active, so that it said a shrill scream cut the slice through the eerie calmness. But like I said, I like that image. So I would probably just try to pull some of the passive voice out later and leave that one, so that you don't feel like you've got the repeated to be verbs later. So that's where you could bring in a fragment again, something didn't sound like a boy, but it was, could maybe be a little bit more active. A tall, dark figure chased the boy into a dungeon like smelly dead end of a street, that sort of thing. Then you can keep that nice initial image without having too much repetition.
Yeah, and I think what I would really like to see for this sentence, it was highly unlikely to be that of a boy, would be more of a hint of the narrator, like Joe was surprised it was a boy. But what I'm starting to sense here is that this narrator might be a little bit more omniscient and viewing this from afar. So that might be, and that's the sense that a lot of that passive voice gives readers. It's not, I'm not getting a real sense of the character that's taking part in or seeing this, which is fine. I mean, for example, The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak is narrated by Death. So sometimes it can be really cool to have that narrator who's looking at things from on high. But that's what this is making me think about. Yeah, absolutely, can tighten that up. Okay, Julie.
All righty, so next up, I've got what I think is a middle grade fantasy, which is really my my sweet spot. So I've got A Dragon's Tale here by Dark Knight. As I slowly wake, I see my parents waking up as well. How long do we have to stay in this cave? I mean, first, it smells like rotten guts. Second, it's dark, and I mean very dark. I say as I slowly stand up. There's a difference in where you want to live and where you must to survive. After Queen Farron evicted us from her kingdom, this is the best we've got, my dad says as he looks at me. If you want, you can go try and fend for yourself. So with a really short passage, we know quite a lot right up front. So it's a great starting point, but I do just have a few tweaks. So unless the dragon's tail itself, his physical tail, has some sort of importance in the story, I'm gonna guess that we mean tail like a story for that title. And then one thing I do want to point out, with middle grade and particularly with fantasy, present tense, you just don't see that often. So I'll go ahead and keep this in present tense, but if this were a client, I would be talking with them a lot about trying to make it marketable and possibly switching it to first person past tense. You do see first person present in contemporary YA quite a bit, but not so much in middle grade and also not in fantasy. So I think the thing I want here is a little bit more orientation to where we are. The cave is a really cool setting, especially one that smells like rotten guts. That sounds like a really good middle grade setting. But I want a little bit more of a sense of that, and that'll help freshen up waking up as the opening, because that's a little bit of a cliche. So I would maybe start just with, I open my eyes, and instead of see my parents wake up is a little vague, like what does it look like? That's a tell where you could show instead something along the lines of my parents stir next to me on the floor of the and I'd put an adjective in here, on the floor of the cave. It's a smelly cave, it's a dark cave, maybe it's also wet, you know, something like that. So I leave that to the author to tell me exactly what adjective they want here, but I'm just gonna put in the wet cave. Okay, so this next piece of dialogue is a little bit long. I like to tell my clients to stick to sort of 3 beats or 3 short phrases with dialogue so that you don't get into this sort of like long, unnatural flow. So I would just tighten this up so that it hits those 3 beats. How long do we have to stay in this cave? It smells like rotten guts. And it's dark. I kind of like the voice of, and I mean very dark, but you could tighten that up even further and delete that if you wanted. Dialogue punctuation is something that I often see done incorrectly in my clients' work. So that needs to be a comma there instead of a period. I say as I slowly stand up. Okay, so the main character has stood up. The parents are stirring next to him or her on the floor. I'd like a little orientation again to the dad here before he starts talking, because again, you've got 3 long lines, 2.5 long lines of dialogue here before we see dad, and dad's just looking at at the main character, which isn't very vivid. So you might just have, you know, dad stretches as he sits up, or just something to orient us that to where dad is in space and time before he gets to talk. I think a lot of times people leave, especially in first drafts, leave contractions out of their speaking. I think it's very rare that we don't say there's a difference instead of saying there is a difference. So I would do that just to improve like the flow of the dialogue here. There's a difference between where you want to live and where you must to survive. So this gets into a little bit of territory where the dad is really addressing the readers, because of course the son already knows that that Queen Farron has evicted them from her kingdom. So I would maybe cut this out and either put it as an aside, like maybe the main character even says up above, thinks to himself, geez, you know, it's terrible that we have to be here when we've been evicted, or something like that, to let the reader know their situation. But it doesn't make sense to have it in dialogue when you're stating something that obviously everybody that's there in the cave with them already knows. So I would just cut this down to, this is the best we've got. And again, the punctuation needs to be a comma here, and then the dialogue tag doesn't need to be capitalized. And I mentioned earlier that you could do something more vivid than having a conversation where, you know, son looks at dad, dad looks back at son, right? That's kind of implied by dialogue. And can probably just come out. If you want to, you can go try to fend for yourself, period. The other comment I have here is it's obvious that they've got a really obvious story problem, which is great to have that right up in, from the beginning. But I wonder how long they've been in the cave, because this is the kind of conversation that I don't know that they would have after weeks and weeks in the cave. Like every morning, does the son wake up and say, oh, the cave is dark and it stinks, why are we still here? I'd love to get some sense in this last sentence of like, you've been complaining every morning for the last 3 weeks. Why don't you try to go fend for yourself or something like that? But like I said, the cave is a really, especially a smelly, dark cave, is a great setting for middle grade. And I think this could really work for the opening for a middle grade fantasy. Anything you want to add, Tracy?
Yeah, I've been trying to keep up with the chat, and it looks like we had a question about why there should be a comma versus a period at the end of the dialogue. So if there's a dialogue tag, like I say or I shout, you use a comma right before the quotes, inside the quotes. But let's say this author, we're going to do, this is just going to look way too confusing. So let's try this. Let's say the author was going to leave the period. They could cut out I say, as I, and just have the action. I mean, very dark. I slowly stand up. So if you use a tag like I say or I said, use a comma. If you go straight to an action, that's when you start a new sentence with your dialogue tag. That's a very common problem with dialogue.
Right. And inserting gestures like that can be a great way to break up longer stretches of dialogue too, going back to that 3-beat rule that I mentioned earlier. So, you know, if somebody has 4 or 5 things that they want somebody to say, breaking it up with a gesture in the middle can help it read better and help the flow and make it seem a little bit less like a monologue as well.
Yeah. Is that Martin trying to tell us something? Or
I don't know.
Just going to my submission. Okay. All right. So keeping us moving, Next one on my list is The First Day by Charlie. And the context for this one is that it's the introduction of a new boss. So quick title case, first day. I'm supposed to read it. From the double doors emerged a small man whose height barely reached the shoulders of the security guards surrounding him. He stood still, front and center of the room, looking deep into the eyes of the new hires seated in front of him. Bursting with anticipation, fueled by optimism, the new hires drew their pens and opened their notebooks, more importantly, their hearts, ready to experience, to record what would follow. It's got a fun rhythm to it already. Let's see. So, from the double doors emerged a small man, and this is who apostrophe S. It's kind of like it apostrophe S, whereas apostrophe S would normally mean something's possessive. In this case, it actually means who is. So who is height isn't what this author is trying to say. So that would be whose height barely reached the shoulders of the security guards surrounding him. I think I would maybe tweak this to whose head barely reached the shoulders of the security guards surrounding him, just because that is a little bit of a better image, but I don't think there's anything wrong with height. He stood still, front and center of the room. I think you could probably cut of the room unless there's something interesting about the room that you'd want to add. Like if it's a room of cubicles or this seems like a workplace thing. But in this case, I think you could probably cut that. Looking deep into the eyes of the new hire seated in front of him. This was a fun sentence where this author plays with rhythm. So, bursting with anticipation, fueled by optimism, the new hires drew their pens and opened their notebooks, more importantly, their hearts, ready to experience, to record what would follow. And what I think is really interesting about this one is that technically you could should add and there, but I would just leave it because it seems to me like this rhythm is really intentional, and as a reader, I would go with it. What do you think, Julie? Would you have an and there? Kachi.
Actually, I like it without as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's anything else to add to this one?
It gives that idea of eagerness. Somebody in the comments did point out that we could probably omit the first comma in the first sentence, and I think that's
And then double doors.
That's true.
And there's a small man whose head, It's true. I could go either way on that one.
Yeah,
but I am known to be a lover of commas. Go ahead, Julie.
Oh, that's funny because I was just going to say I'm a comma minimalist, except for the Oxford comma, which I always use. So that's the thing. Yeah, definitely. There are some places where where it's black and white with commas. You must have one, or you must not have one. But there definitely is some gray area there, and I think again, it's just a matter of being consistent across an entire document.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I'm a no on that comma.
Yeah, and I would probably take out front and center too. It feels a little cliche to me, but
right. Or I even saw someone said you could take out still, which I think is a good idea. So in that case, you would lose that comma there too. So he stood front and center, looking deep into the eyes of the new hire seated in front of him. But I always weigh it, because I do really enjoy that rhythm. So I like the commas. I feel like that's creating like a real pause, and I can just see this office space where everybody's like, okay, is this guy going to be a jerk? Is he going to be a great boss? Like, how do we get him to give us a raise or give us good projects? So, it's thinking about there's correct punctuation, and then there's also maybe playing with the punctuation to create a rhythm in the prose.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
You're
just
like they're incomplete sentences.
Right. That's what I was just going to say. Yeah,
Okay.
perfect. So, yeah, all righty. So somebody asked in the comments at the end, I didn't want to interrupt Tracy, whether the 3-beat rule was for middle grade only. And I just wanted to clarify that that I recommend that for all age categories. There's very few times when you really want a character providing long passages of dialogue. It's not really how we speak normally, and it's not as interesting to read. So so I do a lot to shorten, tighten dialogue, and a beat again is just like a phrase, a short phrase. So that's something that you can play with a little bit. Obviously, there'll be times maybe where someone's telling a story or something and has a little bit longer monologue, but for most back and forth conversation, you really want to keep to short and sweet. And the other thing that somebody asked about was about dialogue tags. I think it can get really daunting if you have a long conversation of he said, she said, he said, I said, he said, she said. So I look for ways to freshen that up as well with either with a gesture occasionally that indicates who's speaking instead of the he said, she said. But for the most part, your eyes eventually just sort of glance over those words and don't really record them. So it's just, as long as it's clear who's speaking, I'd say cut as many tags as you can. Again, just to be a minimalist about that. Okay, so for our next one here, and I apologize in advance if I'm not gonna pronounce the title correctly. Sinan in the South. I love this one because it's got a really evocative image in the beginning. The frothing waves ebbed in and out as the stars stood still. I breathed in and out, but my feet stayed rooted to the ground. The white sand shifted around my feet and sifted between my toes, and still I couldn't bring myself to move. My heart was pounding within my breast, and my rib cage heaved, struggling to draw breath, and yet my body would not move. So we've got somebody here standing at night out at the edge of the waves, and you can tell that something momentous is about to happen, which is an evocative opening. But there's also quite a lot of what I call purple prose, a lot of adjectives and a little bit of repeated words that I think we can cut out to make this even stronger. So for example, I feel like frothing is sort of implied here, so we could just cut that. The waves ebbed. And we've got in and out later, so I'm going to cut it here so that we have the waves ebbed as the stars stood still. I think that still keeps all of the great things about the image, and it's just a little bit more concise. I breathed in and out. I would cut this down too. I breathed in and out, my feet rooted to the ground. The white sand shifted around my feet. Because we've got a couple of ands in the sentence, I would cut this one out and change this to the white sand shifted around my feet, sifting between my toes. And still I couldn't bring myself to move, because I think that this and is stronger than that first one anyway. Yeah, so I will say that heart pounding is tends to be really a cliche and something that people use to convey high emotion a lot. So use it sparingly. I'm going to leave it here just because I don't know enough about the story to know what else might be going on with this character. But I think it's really easy to just do like a global search on heart. And if you have heart like every couple of pages, think that you probably need a new way of describing how a character's body is feeling. But I would make this active too. My heart pounded. I'm just gonna go ahead and cut within my breast because where else would the heart be? But I would say you could actually cut this entire first phrase and just go straight to my rib cage heaved, struggling to draw breath, which honestly I think conveys the same information a little bit more vividly and a little less cliche. So I think I am just going to do that. My rib cage heaved, and it's not really the rib cage that's struggling to draw breath, it's the main character. So I would maybe say, as I struggled to draw breath, and yet my body would not move. That's again kind of an echo of what you've got here. So I'd think about coming up with a more vivid way to describe this last sentence here. You know, my body. Let's see. My rib cage heaved as I struggled to draw breath, and yet I would maybe even say I didn't move, or I could not move. Because again, it's really the character themselves that's moving their body. It's not like their body is literally frozen. It's frozen with the fear or emotion that's going on in the scene. So what do you think, Tracy? Anything that you'd like to add?
Let's see. I'm trying to come in from the comments too. So ebbed, I actually went and looked it up while you were talking, because ebbed means receding, so I think there you actually kind of need in and out, or somebody said ebbed and flowed, because ebbed just means the waves are going away and not coming back and forth. I had to look it up. I was like, what exactly does ebbed mean? So I would maybe leave the in and out there, and then somebody else also pointed out that in the second sentence they're breathing in and out, but then in the last sentence they're struggling to breathe. So maybe there's a missed opportunity there for this author to have the breath struggling in the first sentence or second sentence. So those are just ways. I mean, I think it was fun. It was fun to watch in the comments, and also to just read this, you know, as a reader, and like, oh, this sounds beautiful. But then it's interesting how when you like really dive deep and you're like, okay, we're going to take this from beautiful to like the next level. It's interesting to see, you know, just how much there is once you start kind of chiseling away at the surface.
Right.
And that's not just a passage. It's, you know, so much writing.
Yeah. I would just say too, though, I totally hear what you're saying about ebbed, but waves don't ebb in and out, which is why I cut that in and out. Like they could ebb and flow, which would give you the idea of in and out. But
right.
But so yeah, definitely could do some more wordsmithing there. But I think that's a good point about the breath coming up in two places, because breath is another thing like heart's pounding that gets used a lot. So maybe one of those could come out in favor of another type of description that would give us some more information about what that character is going through.
Do you have the emotional emotion thesaurus, Julie? You know what
I do.
I don't know which one. Yeah. It's like you pick an emotion, then it tells you all of these actions that can show it, which can help expand things beyond hearts pounding and breathing.
Right. I actually really, really love The Emotional Craft of Fiction by Donald Moss. I think that's the best craft book on how to express emotion without telling the reader, you know, I was sad. So
I think I heard Martin.
Yeah. How are we doing on time, Martin? Do we need to wrap it up?
Yeah, well, 15 minutes past, but if you're up for doing just one more, Tracy, and then perhaps we'll answer a few of the questions afterwards, and then we'll be out by the end of the hour.
Sure. Okay, so this one is The Librarians Read. and by Vicky Acer. And this is the opening paragraph, and Vicky needs it to pop. Okay, so I will read it. The librarians read. Just another morning to Amy Whitman. Just another day, another week, another year. Then again, maybe not. She stretched and yawned as she headed to the kitchen for her cup of morning coffee. With an eerie feeling, she glanced toward the small but neat desk in the corner of the living room. Walking toward the desk, hairs pickled on the back of Amy's neck until she picked up a newspaper. She shivered. I want to know what's on that newspaper. Okay, so the title, I'm not really sure, is this supposed to be one librarian's read or something that like 3 librarians are reading? Because if you have the S and then the apostrophe, it's plural and possessive. I'm going to guess that this is one librarian. Let's see. See there. And again, just another morning. Amy Whitman, just another day, another week, another year. That's a fun rhythm. Then again, maybe not. That's a fun sentence fragment. She stretched and yawned as she headed to the kitchen for her cup of morning coffee. You could probably cut morning here because she's stretching and yawning, but I'm not gonna, when I copy edit, I try to mess with things as little as possible, but that is something to maybe consider. With an eerie feeling, she glanced toward the small but neat desk in the corner of the room, and you can see how but neat is set off by 2 commas. It's not essential to the meaning of the sentence, so that is the right thing to do. Walking toward the desk, hairs prickled on the back of Amy's neck. So let's see. That makes it seem like the hairs are walking toward the desk, and I don't think that's this. I don't think it's a fantasy horror book in that way. So that is what's called. It's similar to the rib cage breathing in Julie's example. It's called a dangling modifier because it's not really clear what this phrase "walking toward the desk" is attempting to modify, and it's definitely not modifying hairs. It means Amy's walking toward the desk. The other question I have about this sentence is what is this until referring to? Is she walking until she picked up a newspaper? Are the hairs prickling until she picked up a newspaper? I'm not sure. So without being able to have clarification from the author, I would do something like Amy walked toward the desk, hairs prickling on the back of her neck. And then my other question is the newspaper on the desk or is it like on the floor? I think something like this could help. She picked up the newspaper. Oh, and also, right, is it today's newspaper? She picked up the newspaper she had brought inside that morning and shivered when she saw the bottom of the front page. You think about that. But that's something where I would really make a note for the author and just ask for some clarification. But this is my suggestion that my example of how it could be done. Not the only way. Oh, and one thing I really love about this is that one of the questions I ask my clients a lot is, why is the book starting today? What's different about this day? And I love how this one really plays with that idea by saying, oh yeah, it's just another day, then again. And I thought that was kind of a fun voice. Seems like maybe a cozy mystery to me of some sort. And I thought that was fun. Julie, anything to add?
I wondered about the placement of eerie feeling in this one, just because, like, I want to know what it is that gave her the eerie feeling. Obviously, the newspaper is the key piece there, but could she see that as she glanced at the desk?
Right, is the newspaper? like, did somebody else put it there? That's kind of what that
right.
makes me think. Yeah.
Right. So
Right.
I wanted to dig in more. And again, that maybe is a little bit more of a developmental edit than a copy edit. There's nothing technically wrong with that sentence, but I would dig it, especially if this is the opening page. I will say that when I'm copy editing, if I know somebody is going to be going out to query or entering a contest or submitting to a magazine publication or something like that, I'll do a little bit heavier editing on that first page to make sure that it really, really sings to get people drawn into the story.
Same here, absolutely. And that's also the really the only page that people are reading without any context. So you have to just really nail it more than on other pages.
Yeah.
Okay, can you both hear me?
Yes.
Ah, fantastic. Thank you. That was really great. Just want to ask you a few questions based on stuff that I've read on the site as well that might be useful for people to ask. I guess, how sort of detailed do you get when you're working for a copy editing client as opposed to a developmental one? I guess some of these you revise a fair amount into the sentences, but do you sort of set yourself limits on how much you'll go into it?
I can start. So with the copy edit, if something is technically wrong, I mark it in every instance that I see. I'm not perfect. I get close, but I'm not perfect. I mark it in every instance that I see, unless it's very obvious to me that the author is intentionally playing with something like a sentence fragment. And then my goal is to try to figure out what does this author want the voice and style to be. And normally when I'm copy editing, instead of rewriting a whole sentence in the text, I'll add it in a comment. And I'll only just track smaller changes in the text. And I do then sometimes if something seems off with normally on the scene level or the page level and not the whole book level, I will say, hey, this scene confused me because of X, Y, and Z. And that's about as much as I go into the big picture. Julie?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I will say that quite often when I get a request through Readsy, somebody will select developmental edit, editorial assessment, and copy editing. And then I'll use the sample to determine whether I think they really want copy edits. I think understanding the level of edit can be difficult because different people use different, like what's the difference between copy editing and proofreading? Yeah. Well, honestly, it really depends on what website you're on because different people use some of those terms interchangeably. So, but like Tracy, I don't do a full developmental edit when I'm copy editing. So, but I might track a few big picture issues if I see them. I will say that for a full length, like a book length manuscript, if there is something that I see that's repeated incorrectly, like I just recently did a nonfiction piece where all of the citations were done wrong. I didn't actually correct all of them. I just marked them and said, this is the style that these all need to be put in.
Right, so pull out a question here. Asked, is it good to use sentence fragments other than in dialogue?
Yeah.
Julie, you want to take this one?
I use them a lot stylistically. So I think it's just important to understand what you're doing and use them with intention.
Yeah, I don't think you ever want to have an accidental sentence fragment. But if you're using, really short sentence fragments, it can add to the voice a lot. So when I'm editing, if I even have to ask, did that person do a sentence fragment on purpose? I'm probably going to mark it. So it should be really obvious that it's intentional.
Yeah, and you might see more fragments, for example, and shorter sentences in general, like during a really tense scene or an action scene. So that's another way that they can be used stylistically for voice, but also for tension.
Okay, we're just about hit the hour. I want to thank you both so much for doing this for us. We had a lot of great interaction. It was actually a lot more interactive than I thought it would be. A lot of people in the comments were playing along at home. I want to let you know that these bits of copy-edited text will be up on the Readsy blog within a few days. Just search for Readsy Live on Google and you'll find the place. If you're looking for copy editors or any sort of editors to work with, Tracy, what sort of projects are you looking to work on in the coming months?
Let's see. I do a wide variety of genres and age categories. I just did the Readsy prompt for animal stories, so I would love some animal stories. You can see my art. I love animals. And maybe some good young adult contemporary would be fun right now.
Ooh. Julie?
I am always looking for fantasy, especially middle grade and YA, with a particular soft spot for middle grade. I love dragons, so I loved that we got a sample with that. So yeah, any fantasy is always going to be my favorite kind of project.
Amazing. Cool. As Tracy mentioned, we do run weekly competitions over on Readsy. We'll put the link for that in this as well. So there's a new competition each week. We send out 5 prompts. You just sign up. You get new prompts each week. Tracy's the ones that went out last week. Have we picked the winners yet?
No.
Oh my God. Okay, so that's probably coming your way. I think by Friday we'll have a winner for that one. And if you win one of our future contests, you could be the proud owner of $50 American. And we will also publish you on our website and send it around. So that is also a great prize. Thank you so much. We'll be posting this replay along with the before and afters for the copy editing. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Julie.